afternoon, everyone. If you'll just take your seats, we're ready to get started. So, welcome to our panel this afternoon, Should We Create Gods of War? Sponsored by the Center for Ethics and the Rule of Law, the Annenberg Public Policy Center, and our partners at UMass Lowell. My name is Claire Finkelstein, and I'm the Faculty Director of the Center for Ethics and the Rule of Law, or CERL as we're known. CERL is a nonpartisan, interdisciplinary institute dedicated to preserving and promoting ethics and the rule of law in national security, warfare, and democratic governance. Affiliated with the Annenberg Public Policy Center of the University of Pennsylvania, CERL draws from the study of law, philosophy, and ethics to answer the difficult questions that arise in times of war and contemporary transnational conflicts. CERL brings together scholars, policymakers, and professionals across the legal, military, intelligence, and business sectors to research, analyze, and make policy recommendations that address today's challenging issues, such as domestic violent extremism, the use of autonomous weapons, and protection of civilians in war zones. CERL carries out its mission through conferences and symposia, research and policy papers, briefings, blog publications, student projects, and our series with Oxford University Press. In addition, each summer, CERL hosts law graduate and a few undergraduate students interested in national security for a 9-week summer internship program. CERL interns help further CERL's mission through research, writing, and conference planning, and gain valuable insights through conversations with national security experts on critical issues facing our nation today. There remain a few slots open in our summer internship program for this summer, so if anyone that you know is still interested in applying, please go to our website and click on Student Opportunities, and you can see how to apply. So now, when Nick Evans first reached out to me to propose that we co-sponsor a project on super soldiers, I knew right away that we wanted to partake. Not only have I known Nick for many years and known the excellent and complex work that he does on bioethics, among other things, but the topic is precisely the kind of ethical question with which CERL grapples. As some of you know, CERL has worked extensively on the ethics of technology in war, addressing questions such as whether remote targeting impacts collateral damage, proportionality calculations, or the principle of distinction, or whether introducing the use of autonomous weapons systems into the kill chain could ever be ethical, and if so, what ethical guidelines the U.S. and its partners should commit to follow in the design, build, and implementation of such weapons. The topic of super soldiers is, in a way, the obverse of the autonomous weapons systems topic. Instead of turning robots into soldiers, it may be turning soldiers into robots, or at least on one characterization of it. The extraordinary book by Łukasz Kamiński, who is here with us tonight, has helped to highlight some of the ethical pitfalls and potential opportunities in this arena, as has the book Blitzed by Norman Aller on the use of drugs in the Third Reich to enhance soldier performance. Aller makes the plausible case that the Nazis would not successfully have taken the Sudetenland in 1939 had they not engaged in heavy use of forced amphetamines for their troops. Should the U.S. engage in soldier enhancements? Is such usage ethical? Is failure to use enhancement ethical, indeed, if it places soldiers in danger that otherwise could be forestalled by the use of such enhancements? And on a meta level, who should decide such questions, the soldiers themselves, or military leadership, or policymakers? These are some of the questions that I imagine we'll talk about Tonight and over the course of the next several days, we're at the beginning of a two-day roundtable conference, and many of you have traveled from very far away, including points as far away as Israel, to join us for this conference. I'm thrilled that we'll be able to have both a public and a closed-door session on this incredibly important topic. As usual, I'm very pleased that we're able to be at the cutting edge of critical military ethical issues and to have such wonderful partners to do this with. Let me now introduce our panelists. First, all the way on the right here, General James Cartwright, who has been with Searle on a number of occasions. We're delighted to see you back, General. He retired from active duty on September 1st, 2011, after 40 years of service in the United States Marine Corps. General Cartwright served as commander of U.S. Strategic Command before being nominated and appointed as the 8th Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the nation's second highest military officer. General Cartwright served his 4-year tenure as Vice Chairman across 2 presidential administrations and constant military operations against diverse and evolving enemies. He became widely recognized for his technical acumen, vision of future national security concepts, and keen ability to integrate systems, organizations, and people in ways that encouraged creativity and sparked innovation in the areas of strategic deterrence, nuclear proliferation, missile defense, cybersecurity, and adaptive acquisition processes. Next, Dr. Laura Cabrera is the Dorothy Four Huck and J. Lloyd Huck Chair in Neuroethics. She is an associate professor of engineering science and mechanics and philosophy at Penn State University. She is a senior research associate at the Rock Ethics Institute and affiliated with the Center for Neural Engineering. She is also faculty affiliate at Neuroethics Canada, University of British Columbia. We are thrilled to have Dr. Cabrera here with us today. Dr. Paul Scharr is the Vice President and Director of Studies at CNAS. He is the award-winning author of 4 Battlegrounds, Power in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. His first book, Army of None, Autonomous Weapons and the Future of War, won the 2019 Colby Award and was named one of Bill Gates's top 5 books of 2018. Also named by The Economist one of the top 5 books to understand modern warfare. Scharr previously worked in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, where he played a leading role in establishing policies on unmanned and autonomous systems and emerging weapons technologies. He led the Department of Defense working group that drafted DoD Directive 3000.09, establishing the department's policies on autonomy in weapons systems. And last but not least, Nicholas Evans, our moderator for today, is Associate Professor of Philosophy at the University of Massachusetts Lowell, a 2023 Greenwald Foundation faculty scholar. He currently conducts research on the ethics of emerging technologies with a focus on national security issues. He is best known for his research on dual-use research in the life sciences and has recently begun work examining research ethics concerns arising from the performance enhancement of active military personnel funded by the U.S. Air Force Office of Scientific Research. Prior to his appointment at UMass, Nick completed postdoctoral research at the Perelman School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania, and he worked here with Jonathan Moreno, who is here somewhere, and that's how I got to know Nick. I had the great pleasure of meeting him through Jonathan, and I've had the pleasure of being able to work with him ever since. So I turn it over to Nick, and I'm sure we'll have a wonderful panel. Please join me in welcoming our panelists.
Thank you, Claire, for that wonderful introduction, and welcome everybody to this keynote panel, Should We Create Gods of War? Assessing the Ethical and Legal Posture of Soldier Enhancements. So as Claire said, my name is Nicholas Evans. I'm an associate professor and the current chair of philosophy at the University of Massachusetts Lowell, and I'm one of the conveners of what stands to be a really productive workshop on the ethical and legal significance of super soldiers, of which this keynote panel is the first and public-facing event. Now, humans have, and I think always will, be driven to enhance themselves. Most of you, I suspect, have taken part in at least one performance-enhancing drug today in the form of the caffeine that gets you out of bed and keeps you out of bed. Our students use drugs like Adderall to prepare for exams, pull all-nighters, and balance increasingly demanding schedules as they prepare for a place in our workforce. And athletes are, even if sometimes only through a combination of rigorously tested training, nutrition, and sleep strategies, capable of feats that in previous decades were thought unthinkable, including people such as Eliud Kipchoge, who will grace my home city next week as he takes his sub-2-hour marathon time to the Boston Marathon. Warfighting is no different. Soldiers, airmen, and sailors have a long history of using any and all means to keep themselves and their comrades alive. This can be seen in, for example, the famed Norse berserkers of the sagas, whose ferocity while Vikinger has been attributed to the Amanita muscaria mushroom, the use of coffee in the American Civil War as a performance-enhancing drug, the aforementioned use of amphetamines in World War II, including but not limited to the Blitzkrieg. Everyone was having fun with meth during World War II. Through to advances in pharmacology, cybernetics, and human AI teaming in the 21st century for the US, her allies, and her adversaries. But where civilians might engage in a rat race of their own volition, warfighters experience distinct challenges, squaring individual rights with the strategic goals of the fighting force, issues of coercion in military medicine, and the long-term personal and social consequences of becoming enhanced in the national interest and either staying that way or being returned to something less. These issues and others motivate this week's workshop and today's panel. So I had a whole section where I was going to introduce your panelists, but Claire kind of beat me to the jump. So this intro is going to be a lot quicker than I expected. But before kind of turning it over to our panelists, some disclosures and thanks are in order. This workshop is partly funded by the U.S. Air Force Office of Scientific Research under funding that I and Dr. Neil Shortland, who is not here today but will be here tomorrow for the workshop. He has a new baby named Evie, and she's adorable. So we received this to study the ethics of performance enhancement in defensive contexts, but views expressed by our participants, however, are of course made in a personal capacity as soldiers and subject matter experts and do not reflect the position of our funders, our host institutions, or our national governments. Now, I would like to thank for their work in organizing this panel and workshop a number of people without whom we would not be here in beautiful University City. This conference is first and foremost the work of Dr. Blake Hereth, who, although I pitched the conference to Claire, they pitched the conference to me and asked me for the money for it, and has shepherded this through to its final form. So we wouldn't be here today without Blake's incredible work kind of rounding this esteemed group of people up. Yeah, thank you. I'd also like to thank Claire personally as the director of Searle for championing this workshop to the board at Searle and getting us approved and providing us the space and support to conduct it here at Penn. Claire, along with Jonathan Moreno at the Penn Department for Medical Ethics and Health Policy, was a mentor and supporter of mine when I first arrived here in the United States and actually helped me get my first grant funding on enhancement in defensive contexts with the Greenwell Foundation, a very tiny grant that we have since turned into a much bigger grant. And it's really an honor to kind of return here and repay their kindness in the form of the support for this workshop. I would also like to thank at Penn, Ilya Rudiak, Jen Cohen, and Catherine Stellato for their tireless work coordinating the logistics of this workshop. At UMass Lowell, I would like to thank Alistair Silva and Gail Castellano, who aren't here today, but without whom this workshop simply would not have happened. So you've already received the introductions for these esteemed group of people, so I'm just going to explain the structure of the keynote to come. So I'm going to start with some high-level overviews of the issue at hand by our panelists in order, after which I'll pose them some questions about what enhancement constitutes in the military space, where we stand now and what issues present us today, and how we should move into a future in which we are thinking about enhancing the fighting force. We'll then have ample time for questions from our audience. So with that, General Cartwright, I'll turn to you to give us an introduction to how your thinking has started on enhancement and where it is now.
Thank you. I think it's important to kind of first you come to these events and you wonder if anybody remembers anything after it's over. I've done 2 others here. One when I was struggling to try to put a framework around the use of drones. Another one when I was struggling to try to put a framework around cyber. Both of them were instrumental in some of the decisions that we made later in how we look at those areas. And so, you know, I quickly raised my hand for this one, although I hate the title, because this is another issue that we've got to get our arms around. And I guess my first bullet is, if you don't have a definition, it's really hard to build a framework. And part of what I'd like to get out of today and the next few days is we've got to figure out a way to think about this problem of enhancement in a definitional way, because this is enhancement, but this isn't what we're talking about. And we've got to figure out how to describe it. And there are a lot of those kinds of problems out there that therefore are very difficult to place policy, norms, regimes, and law against, because they don't have a framework for the definition. And so a lot of that is what I'm looking for. So that was my number 1 problem, is we've got to work on a definition. Number 2, quite frankly, is for me, and I had a role in R&D from about 1980 forward to 2011. The key attribute that we were after in that, and I'm talking in a very large way with the labs and DARPA and all of those different activities, was decision quality and decision speed. Okay, those were the 2 things that we were looking for, and we took an invasive approach to it as well as an external approach through machines and whatnot to figure out how to get there. But those were the first litmus tests you had to pass before considering doing any research on anything. And a lot of times I'd read in the paper something crazy and I'd pick up the phone to DARPA and say, "Are you doing this?" No, you know, but we would be accused of a lot of strange things, and we did a lot of strange things to not leave any stone unturned. The second is the state of the art as we see it right now. The leverage is not in the human body. The leverage is in the tools that we have, and smart tools. That's where the upside potential is. I will never make a human robot that is as strong as a machine that I could make, okay? This isn't sports where a quarter of a second makes a lot of difference, you know, in whether you can physically do something. This is about brawn. This is about brains over brawn, okay? And so decision quality and decision speed always drove the decisions in this area and where we spent our money. And I think the next point, which is equally important, is that the upside of machines is so dramatically greater than the upside of what we can do in scaling the human brain or the human body. Okay, so those are, and the thing that scares me most in this area is genetics. That's my greatest fear. Maybe it shouldn't be a fear. We don't know a lot about it, but I really worry about when the world starts tampering there for enhancement, because there's no backing out of that once you've done it and debating it. So those are my opening points.
Wonderful. Laura.
Yeah, I have so many things I would like to say in response to what General Cartwright started, but I'll start with the definition point, because I think I was also going to touch on that, which is, what is enhancement, right? Are we talking about just augmenting something, increasing a quantity or a quality of something? So although it might be helpful to have a definition, I think we have for decades been discussing it, and it just seems that we're probably going to stick with many more years to come discussing. But if we can accept a definition, a working definition for us to use in the military, that I think would be helpful. The other point that I think is important and intersects with my remarks that I have was, are we trying to enhance, is enhancement of humans or enhancement for humans? And I think that kind of nicely touched with this idea of, do we really need to be enhancing biologically or genetically humans, or should we be thinking of technologies that we can use and be enhanced by these tools, right? And so I think that's an important distinction, and it also makes sense when we try to think in this context of individualistic type of enhancement versus enhancement that we can actually use for, several people, for societies, for communities, for groups. And I have that framework a lot in my dissertation as a PhD, and I think something like that, it might be also useful in the context of military. The three other points that I want to leave you with is, in terms of enhancement in general, not only for soldiers, I think there's three things that are important to keep in mind. One is context. So right now we're talking about the military, but even within the military, there are different contexts that we can be thinking of, right? It's not the same to think of someone that is a Marine versus someone that is, a pilot. I mean, their context will require different type of enhancements that would benefit whatever, activities or capacities that they might be useful for them to have. In the context of a society that I'm serving for us, it was clear to define, I focus a lot of my work in neurotechnology. So are we using neurotechnology for the military? Are we using it for sport? Are we using it for education and for workplace? So again, having a definition of the context is important as we develop these frameworks. The other one that I have is, what are the means that we want to achieve, right? Is this just, the type of technologies that we want to use? Are we want to enhance by using genetic engineering? Do we want to use neural implants? Are we planning to use partner of artificial intelligence with the human? So again, the means are important, and I know there are scholars that would say that the means don't make a moral difference, but I would argue that it does. And then the final point is the ends of the enhancements that we're trying to achieve, right? One thing is to think of enhancement that will help a soldier to, keep safe and kind of in a defensive strategy, or are we thinking of enhancements that will make them more deadly to others? So I think those are my three kind of key areas that I would like to leave us to think when we think about enhancement in general.
Okay, thanks so much. Well, thank you everyone for being here today, and thank you both for your comments. So I want to focus my opening comments here on some of the internal ways that we can think about enhancing service member performance, because both General Cartwright and Dr. Cabrera talked about the sort of external tools that we could use, which we use many in the military, but also there are internal things that we can do to people. I'm struck in particular by a huge disconnect between how the military talks about service member performance and then what the military does. What the military says is that we value service member performance, and war is about humans and human nature, and we're going to invest in our service members and improve their performance. And in practice, the military has basically a medieval approach to human performance. So there's lots of really interesting things that we can talk about on things that are on the cutting edge of human performance, performance-enhancing drugs, electrical interventions that might improve cognitive performance. There's things that, start to raise difficult ethical issues. But even if you just set all that aside, if you were to just focus on really basic things like sleep and nutrition and using best practices coming out of sports, the military has tremendous advantages they can be gained that don't come anywhere near some of the more contentious issues. And so I think, for these settings, the contentious issues are great, they're worth discussing, and there might be things that the military should be pursuing in those kinds of areas. But there's also so much room to be gained in things that really are pretty straightforward, that we have good evidence for, when we could improve performance. That one weird trick that can change everything is basically sleep. Sleep is the number one thing, and the military does a terrible job at managing people's sleep. The military widely uses caffeine, as do many people, as Nick mentioned, the widest performance-enhancing drug on the planet, and in a completely unregulated and frankly not very helpful fashion. So when service members are deployed overseas, there's just the dining halls are stocked full of energy drinks, and you've got service members using them, on their own in ways that then are disruptive to sleep patterns and to performance over a long term. We can have a better approach. We can have a better approach where we're using evidence And we're using some of these tools, whether it's nutrition, whether it's best practices of sports, sleep management, and caffeine in ways that are going to be more regulated, more controlled, and going to enhance service member performance.
Wonderful. So based on these early comments and thinking about what the Air Force cheerfully calls go pills and no-go pills. So for those of you who are not familiar, go pills are the things that keep you awake, and then no-go pills are the things we give you to counteract the things that we gave you to keep you awake. You know, kind of pairing your modafinil with your Ambien, you know, just to kind of balance everything out. I wanted to kind of start with this operationalization problem, because I think that, as General Cartwright pointed out, it's an issue for policy. Department of Defense instructions don't really come about without operationalizing something. But also to Dr. Cabrera's kind of more foundational questions, which I do remember from sharing an office wall in graduate school together, around, so there's an entire discipline that we call occupational medicine in the military. We also have, you know, existing forms of human optimization, such as getting a good night's sleep and eating the proper macronutrients, right? Which, you know, millions of people who follow, like, you know, fitness accounts on Instagram are obsessed with. And then we have kind of these kind of far off or kind of edge case, you know, human enhancement cases, genetic engineering, brain-computer interfaces. How should we start to kind of, one, I guess the prior question is, should we start to separate these things out? And then if we do, how would you think we should start to separate these out as items for policy? Easy questions first.
You know, I break them out in two ways. It doesn't make it right, but I look at them in two ways. One, as was alluded to, we tend to think of the enhancements by domain, air, space, sea, land, which means we think of them by service, okay? And they're not the same context for each of the services. And so you start to think about them differently. But almost all of the services operate in more than one domain, okay? And so that rule doesn't work very well. But we have two sets of problems. One of them was caused by the systems that we have and operate and the capabilities of those systems. So a bomber pilot that has to go to the other side of the earth, you stick two crews in the airplane so they can go 12 on, 12 off. The other crew sleeps on the floor, freezing to death because it's ice cold, gets up and is supposed to have good decision quality. It takes his go pill, you know, and then somehow you think that they are ready to go and make critical life and death decisions. And the reality is that's not true, okay? But because of this crewing distance and time issue, you try to jump-start it by using a pill, rather than either putting the human in the right place, which is not in the aircraft. It's back in some command and control activity, rather than forward. So there are different ways each of the domains are trying to get at it. Quite frankly, I believe air and space and naval have done a very good job. The ground side is very, very difficult. It's very physical. There's not a good place to lay down a lot of times and take a nap, whatever. You don't get the enemy gets a vote on when you sleep. And we, since probably the late 60s, taking away the night from the enemy was a key activity. Don't let them sleep. Don't let that be a reason that you don't go out and probe and wake them up. And so technology in one case has given us opportunities to use robotics, automation, et cetera, unpiloted type aircraft, to put people in a place where they can be optimized. Okay, that's kind of number one. Can we put them in a place, in an environment where they can be optimized? And the second is a lot of what was discussed here, which is now let's take them and teach them, if they didn't learn it when they were in kindergarten, how to sleep, when to sleep, how to hydrate, how to eat, and be better. And I would say today, the Air Force is probably the best at that. The ground forces are probably the worst. If you've ever eaten C-rats or K-rats, et cetera, on the fly. And so we've got to figure out a way to start to get at that issue of give them an environment in which they can, in fact, optimize their decision capabilities, et cetera, and their physical capabilities. And you see the Air Force moving very quickly, although it was very painful at the beginning. We had this session on the drones and whatnot, but putting the crews in a position where they could, in fact, do that. Now, what we screwed up, quite frankly, was we let them go home at night. I guess that's time on me, but we let them go. We let them go home at night, and you can't send somebody to battle and then ask them to sit down at the dinner table with you and the kids. And so we're trying to figure that out now, but it is part of this wholeness and wellness idea of taking care of the individual in a way that they can operate. I'm watching very closely right now. The Australians are going through a drill where they're basically saying, you have to pass not only a physical exam, but an emotional and mental exam before you can go back on another tour. And trying to figure out what the length of the first tour ought to be and how you think about multiple tours after that. And this is more about the ground forces, but it is starting to get at some of the issues that we're trying to figure out on this wellness part. I'll stop there.
I mean, just to continue the conversation, it's obviously, when we think about enhancement, it's not a zero-sum game, right? Like, you're enhancing something, but there's a trade-off. And so sometimes we just want to think, oh, well, we're enhancing their focus and attention in this particular time, but then we tend not to think of what else we are actually not enhancing. And so when we think about, is it morally okay to enhance, I think we also be thinking, like, what are we, what is the trade-off of this particular enhancement? And some of the things that have also been said, but I want to emphasize, is this idea that let's use what I'm going to call this high technology, right? So we have genetic engineering, we have neural implants, we have, nanotechnology at the time when it was, in fashion. There was a lot of nanotechnology and enhancement. But there are other things that we use and we know that are very, very effective, like, good night's sleep, certain nutrients, and yet we don't really want to invest. We don't even call it enhancement, that we kind of, even though by definition, we know that those should be called enhancement, we tend not to call them enhancements. And so within the context of enhancement, I think other ways in which people tend to divide them is, are we providing a radical change in human performance, or is it just incremental? And people tend not to really bother if it's an incremental, but if we see a radical change, then it's when we start saying we need to discuss, let's act. And the other one, at least in the realm of neurotechnology, but I think is applicable to other forms of technology, is whether this is something that we have inside our bodies versus something that we use externally. So people's intuitions about whether something is morally okay or not, they tend to have different intuitions when it's something inside or implanted versus external. I'm going to leave it there.
Thanks. Yeah. I mean, to your question about how we start to divide these up in the military, I think you have to, and they're already naturally divided up in a lot of ways based on sort of who has the ability to actually make decisions about this at the moment. So things like sleep management or the use of caffeine are effectively done at the small unit level or even maybe the individual level. And that's a place where the central overarching opportunity for the services is to provide better guidance and instruction to individuals and to units about how to, use some of these tools, how to use sleep, how to use caffeine more effectively. And then try to, institute changes, which will take time within the services in those practices, some of which is just cultural, right? It's, sleep is a crutch. I don't know how many times I heard that, right? Or sleep when you're dead. And that's, there's a time and a place for that being a reality in some situations. But we've also seen, based on ample evidence and studies, that lack of sleep leads to massive degradations in human performance. And so, changing that mindset is something where the action might happen at the small level, but there's opportunities at the service level. For some things like nutrition, by default, that's a thing where, they have to be done centrally, because if you said, okay, we want to revamp the food that we're, providing to service members, now you have to actually look at the contract that's being done to staff dining facilities, et cetera. But there's huge opportunities there as well. And then you've got things that are going to be, if some of more of the special communities, where you have communities using modafinil, for example, and there's going to be, sort of a much more narrow set of issues for those communities about, okay, where is that appropriate? If it's appropriate for B2 pilots, what other communities are it appropriate for, and under what circumstances, and how do we think about using some of those pharmaceutical or other tools in some of those key occupations where the benefit is going to outweigh the risk, because obviously everything has side effects, but in many military contexts, a small edge in performance can have huge outcomes, both in terms of mission capability and performance, but also survivability to those service members, right? So there might be situations where that trade-off is absolutely worth it.
For the audience, I think there's a real social kind of commentary that one of the things that all of our panelists agree on is that we just need to get a good night's sleep. I think that's in the post-pandemic era or the intra-pandemic era, I think that's a really relevant thing that might be weighing on all of our minds. So I wanted to pick up something actually, Dr. Shah, that you started to kind of really get at, that I think all of you can speak to in slightly different ways, which is what is driving kind of the push for warfighter enhancement, right? Because there's kind of three possible sources, and I'd like to kind of unpack kind of, their relative contributions, right? One is responding to kind of an exogenous force, right? China, Russia, pick your bad guy of the day, is doing X, and so we must do Y. Then there's the strategic priorities of the existing kind of services and what they need to do the missions that they have set before them. And then there's the kind of internal institutional mechanics of individual warfighters or small groups of them wanting to be better for certain reasons, wanting to either compete with each other or to maintain a certain standard. And I wanted to kind of unpack where this, so for those of you who don't follow this literature, we were joking in the green room earlier that, every week there's an article in Wired about some wacky new invention that the kids at DARPA have cooked up to change your metabolism, change your strength, change your cognitive function. None of it ever really kind of necessarily goes anywhere, but there's a really persistent theme in the way that we think about the militaries, and military enhancement has always been part of it. And I was wondering if you could speak to kind of where some of these forces are emerging and why it continues to be a perennial issue.
You all can talk to. Think about it a little like this is where there are parallels with athletes, okay? When you're dealing in lethal force and lethal competition, almost everything that you're doing is right on the edge, right at the very edge of competitive capability, okay? And so the idea that I can stay out there longer than you can, I can stay awake longer than you can, I can shoot more, better than you can, you pick it, almost all of that is done at the very edge of human capability today, okay? And so that's what started us down this path of, okay, how do we start to think about where is there another 1 or 2% of whatever? And we were joking as you were here, I talked about, the different things a bomber pilot would go through. One of the biggest breakthroughs that we made, at least during my time, was the DoD has one menu for all services for every day of the year, okay? Can you imagine living on a submarine and eating the calories that a guy who's out in the field running around eats? We were creating beasts, but they were very large people. When we broke that rule and said no more, that you feed them based on what they're doing and what they need and the quality of their life, that rippled through the force like nothing I've ever seen. I mean, it was crazy. Somebody sitting down in a silo eating that many calories or out in a submarine. And so trying to tailor this to some extent was one of the things that we really started down the path on. I think another in this area is the realization that if I do all of the things we do, best sleep, best hydration, best food, et cetera, I'm looking in human mental of getting from somewhere between 100 and 200 milliseconds to make a trained reaction down to 100 to 150. And so we were at diminishing returns, even though it was the right thing to do, because the really bad stuff was being out there forever, being isolated forever, being on the side of a mountain and just wanting something to tell your body that it was okay to be there and you could perform. To get to something that start to think about the machine side of this and machine partnering side of this equation and fundamentally start to shift. And that shift started somewhere in the late 80s, early 90s in earnest, mostly in augmented reality and different kinds of capabilities of machines to be able to do things. Pilots had different ways of getting information to the head. We started first with use all the senses, don't just use your eyes. Okay, so we put what we called bitching Betty into our airplanes and into our tanks and into a lot of our large ships that would come up and say, you're on fire, or you're stalled, or you're not going, whatever it is. But it was to get it in a different way. And then we started to move from just pure foveal vision to trying to get to the peripheral vision, because the reaction speed was dramatically greater if you're trained, okay? Those are the kinds of things that dominated the 80s, 90s, and the early 2000s. And then we started to get into the smarter machines, like, why am I even landing this aircraft? Why not just let the aircraft do it, okay? It's not a technical issue, it's a manhood issue. But to give you a sense of how difficult this was, in the F-18, which I was in the design team for, we put numbers in the augmented reality. So you're going, 500 miles an hour, or whatever the number was. Totally rejected by the fleet because you cannot do something without a needle. You had to have a needle. So we had to take the software, take the needle out, and when 3 years later we got a generation in that grew up in the digital world, we put the digital back in because it was far more accurate, far more intuitive. But it's that kind of stuff. There's not just what's exactly right, but you've got to bring the culture along too. And a lot of times these things, the technology outpaces the culture dramatically. And AI, augmented capabilities in machines are in fact in that position right now. They're disadvantaged.
Yeah, good. Quick comments from you two.
Said, three forces, I said all of them an interplay, right? So, and here's what I bring back, the context component, right? Like right now, if you think of the bad guys in the world and you're trying to, okay, let's make sure that they don't develop the capabilities that we won't be able to respond to. So that has always been there in different ways, right? All the tribes that you try to prevent to harm your tribe and things like that. So that's not going away. The institutions, obviously, and the individual one, to me, are even more interconnected in the sense that it has to do also with the type of values that we have in society. So in the military, of course, we are also thinking in the broader scope of other nations as well. But we've been mentioning like quickness of response, or the ability to perform in high complex environments. And so where are we embedding ourselves as humans that we need to develop certain capacities that in the past we just didn't need to, right? So again, some of these three aspects that you mentioned to me are interconnected because it's a constant, dance, I'm going to call it, of all of these values and exogenous forms coming together and just shaping what we as a society see as the right thing to do. And then to add to that, the individual, of course, what you said at the beginning, enhancement is an all too human desire, right? We've been trying to enhance ourselves since the beginning of time. And the question is like, are there enhancements that are morally wrong and others that are not so much?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the example of the headlines of some kind of weird DARPA science project, because that's not really what's driving use at the regular level, because there isn't a feedback system where those, wild science projects actually make it back into the services. Those science projects might be advancing the frontier of science, but, it's not like then there's some DARPA program and then all of a sudden there's like microchips in everybody's head. I mean, it's not actually how the system works. What's actually happening is just at the grassroots level, individual service members, using supplements, in some cases steroids, to improve their own performance. And I think it's, part of it is, on a day-to-day basis, there are cultural factors. If people are trying to compete, maybe they're trying to do better on that next PT test or compete with someone else in their unit. That could generally be good, but ultimately it's the stakes. The stakes of the competition are life and death. And a tiny edge can make that difference between who lives and who dies in combat. And we want our service members to be seeking every opportunity that they can in a way that is effective and safe to have that advantage.
So on these, we're all coming down on decision making as like one of these key aspects that we're always trying to enhance, especially as, warfare is ever more mechanized, insofar as it can be more mechanized. I'd like to just start with you, Dr. Cabrera, just thinking about, the next 20 years, where should we kind of expect some of these kind of increasing enhancements to come from as we start to kind of continue to invest, for example, in neuroscience, right? Because, insofar as decision-making is grounded in the brain in some sense, there seems like there's a role to play here for basic science. And I'd just kind of like to see where the drivers are going to come from within science for what we can do with decision-making.
Yeah, well, I think we are constrained to our biologies, right? So there's going to be a point where we just won't be able to. And there's also this knowledge that in the human body and in the human brain, there's like this inverse U curve, where you get to a point where if you try to get more of something, it's actually going to be detrimental to it. So considering that, I mean, the science will only going to take us to perhaps reaching that optimal. But then after that, maybe we might not ever be able to compete with the machines, as General has mentioned it. So that's what I think we're trying to play that balance. And obviously in neuroscience and neurotechnology, I think there's this idea of, do we really want to just offload, like put everything into the machines and into the AI? I think there's a lot of fear about doing that. And so people feel more comfortable if we kind of partner with them in ways in which, for example, you might have a BCI where somehow you're still in the loop, or, that can be contested how much in the loop humans might remain or not remain. But that might seem the way I think people's intuition might feel more comfortable, so not fully out of the loop, but definitely from an advantage of really trying to get to a point where only our biological system won't able to take us is going to be to partner with technology.
My sense is that the decision time has dramatically collapsed. Okay, number one. Number two, that if you look at chaos theory, which up until now we've called the fog of war, the ability to discern a pattern within a chaotic environment. We're saturated. We pretty much, the classic example for me is a night carrier landing. The best you can do is have about 4 benchmarks along the point, but before you hit that deck, and you're looking, am I on it? Am I on it? Do I make an adjustment real quick? But that's the best I can do because I can't process the information fast enough. Okay. In cyber, that's very clear that we can't process the information fast enough to be in the decision cycle other than to write the program. Okay. It's the same in space. There's no physical presence in space, yet we have to do command and control and decisions in space. And so how do you start to think about those problems? How do you bring that capability to the force in a way, in a particular domain, that you still have the human in the loop? And it's tough. There aren't very many humans in space. So you bring those decisions to where those humans are. And right now, kind of the measure of merit in space is that any place from Leo in, any place over the Earth, I need to be able to get the information for the decision within 20 milliseconds. That's it. Now, I can't perceive it in 20 milliseconds, but that's what the machine needs in order to close the firing loop. Okay, is the 20 millisecond rule. Okay, we're now at that point in space, which we've never been before. So now we have the ability within 20 milliseconds, any place on the face of the Earth. Okay, that's a dramatic change from where we were. Now, we can't perceive it in that amount of time, so we're relying on machines to move it and process it and give it to us in the right construct. That's the partnership that's being built right now, is that partnership. And each domain is slightly different as to where you put the human to do the partnering, okay? But we grew up in a world where property and proximity were kind of the rule of law, so to speak. And that rule is rapidly eroding. Vietnam, we thought the bomber pilots were crap because they came in, dropped their bombs, and they went back to happy hour in Guam, okay? They didn't have to sleep on the dirt, in the mud, we had that same thing just a few years ago with the guys who were not over in the country, they were here flying the drones, okay? The reality is that time and distance didn't matter. The guys flying the drones had as much PTSD as the guys who were sleeping in the field. The guys flying the drones had the same problems with decision quality and whatnot if they didn't sleep well that night before, et cetera. And we had no litmus test before they sat down at the console to tell us whether they were in good shape or not, okay? All of these things were very culturally driven, quite frankly. But we're starting to understand some of these things and where we want to put the machines, so to speak. But there's a huge trust issue. I mean, this issue I talked about, difference between digital and a needle. These are cultural issues that generally take a couple of turns at it. The question is, do we have time? That's the question right now. The imperative is kind of working against us.
Yeah, and before we get to you, Dr. Shah, I kind of wanted to fold like a sub-question for you, especially given your work on meaningful human control in drone systems. Is this a place where kind of these edge cases of enhancement are really going to come to the fore as we're trying to not keep up with other humans, but actually keep up with the machines that we're being governed by or are meant to be in meaningful human control of?
Yeah, I wish I'd planted that question. That was like exactly where my head was, which is that we are in this really wild place in the development of artificial intelligence where we've been seeing a lot of really rapid progress in AI over the last decade, but the last year has been remarkable. Folks have probably heard of ChatGPT. More recently, GPT-4, the successor to that, came out and achieved human-level performance on the SAT, the GRE, and the bar exam. We're beginning to see the shift very recently in AI towards more general purpose-like systems that can do a whole variety of different cognitive tasks. Now, they're not the same as humans in terms of what they can do, and under the hood, they actually operate like very, very differently than humans. But we are beginning to see the development of systems that are quite intelligent in a variety of ways. And like how we can apply those is really not clear, and the opportunities look quite wide. So in areas like computer programming, for example, these tools have already revolutionized the field of computer programming, where computer programmers are using these AI tools to basically generate code, to debug code. There's a bit, I'm not sure what the mood is here at Penn, but I certainly hear in the news a bit of a moral panic at universities about, AI writing tools. These tools will transform writing in ways that we haven't seen in probably centuries. And some of those things are going to be uncomfortable. Some of those will be good opportunities, but they are going to change how we think about the balance of how we use machines for various tasks. And I think, not a bad comparison here is thinking about how the Industrial Revolution transformed physical labor. And now there's all sorts of machines that we have that perform physical labor, and we're starting to develop machines to perform a whole variety of different kinds of cognitive labor. And one of the challenges we're going to face in the military and across society is how do we figure out what are the things that we want people to be doing and what are the things that we want machines to be doing? And that's particularly going to be challenging because that line is moving very, very quickly. And so there's things that 12 months ago you'd be like, machines can't do that. We need humans to do that. Now you're like, well, I don't know. Like they can do it, but man, it's not reliable. Okay, so now, and that line keeps shifting over time. One takeaway that certainly I have is that, how do we manage these opportunities and these risks that come with these more intelligent machines? It's the desire to figure out how do we improve human cognitive performance to keep up, to maintain control over systems that are maybe operating at speeds faster than humans could, that are processing information faster. And I do think it puts more pressure on looking for opportunities to improve human cognition, whether that's through pharmaceuticals or other approaches, so people can pay better attention, process information faster, because, that there's still going to be a tremendous amount of value in human intelligence. And these AI systems are going to be complementary to that. So we can find ways to improve human intelligence, even in small degrees. It's going to have huge effects.
Wonderful. So we are at time for